by the Romans, and it's called Vita Bona, which we'll talk about when we get to Vienna, but it's considerably older than Berlin. Berlin is a marshy area. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. It wasn't really settled until about 1200, and it begins to tie itself into the history of the region known as Brandenburg. So I'm just going to talk to you about the history of Berlin, and then we're going to do a little bit of the layout of Berlin. So let's just start and look at these pictures that we have. Okay, I think we need all the ones. Can we turn them all? Okay, so these are some of the sites that we will definitely see when we go to Berlin. And I thought we'd run through them first, and then we'll talk about Berlin, then we'll go back and look at what period of Berlin's history they come from. Okay, so this is the Brandenburg Gate that we, of course, will see when we go there. This is at night. It's beautifully lit at night. Okay, this is a Reichstag building which was rebuilt and in the 1990s to now after Germany was reunited. So we'll talk. This is what it looked like after the war. Okay, and this is the glass dome that's inside. It has very strong symbolism for transparency in government. And this is the Chancellor building. It's not one on quite as familiar. And this is a victory column we see. Okay. This is the main drag. It used to be the main drag in the 19th century. And Museum Island, we will definitely visit. Okay. It's beautiful. Linden means lime. And I, as a Floridian, I kept looking for the limes. But it's not lime as a citrus tree. It's a different type of lime tree. But under the lime trees, linden. And it's a beautiful, leafy, green place to walk. Okay. This is Museum Island. This is a mock-up, but you can see it literally is an island. And we will go down there. It was also where the Kaiser lived. And so this is the end of the Museum Island here. And you can see the water in the foreground. Okay, this is the old hub of West Berlin. And this is the great shopping street even today, in the western part of Berlin. You know Berlin is divided. Okay, and this, Ms. McCarran tells me when she was there, they called this is an old church that was left to ruin. They built a new church around it, and Ms. McCarran told me this is called the Lipstick and the Compact. The Germans didn't tell us that when I went there, but it's very stunning. We'll definitely see this ruined church with the new church built around it. Okay, and this is on Kudamm as well. And this is in old East Berlin, and we will talk about this a little bit. The most beautiful square in Berlin. This is Germanenmarkt. That's the front of it. Okay, and this is a palace that's there. It was built in the 18th century. And this is the heart of East Berlin.
Venetria Noble, please come by the main office. Venetria Noble, please come by the office.
Radio Tower. This is the brand new train station, and it doesn't look from here, but it's quite stunning inside. It was opened in 2004 for the World Cup when Germany hosted the World Cup. This is the old Jewish quarter, and it's very interesting today. It's quite a happening place, and we'll talk about that when we get back. But a lot of the clubs and the art scene, this is in old East Berlin as well. Okay, and this is part of that. Potsdamer Platz, that building was built by Sony. We'll talk about that one. This is the inside of it. It's all as the heat builds up inside, the dome shifts and lets the heat out. It's very green, so we'll talk about that. And this was the stadium built by the Nazis for the 1936 Olympics, and where Jesse Owens ran, and it now has a cover, and they still use it. It's one of the few Nazi-era pieces that's still in Berlin. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Berlin and try to move through this kind of quickly. Berlin means the swamp. It's an old Saxon term, an old term that's not a German term, but it literally means the swamp. There are three little rivers that kind of braid their way through, and Berlin is very, very marshy. For that reason, today, there's a lot of little bridges. The main river is called the Spree, and we'll cross the Spree many times because it kind of winds through the city. And Berlin is a city of about 3.5 million people, and it's one of Germany's 16 states. They have 16 states, and it also serves as the nation's capital. Only since 1990, when the Berlin Wall came down, did they move the capital of West Germany, which had been in the West German town of Bonn, back to Berlin. It had always been East Berlin, it was the capital, but the Western capital had moved away from Berlin. Because remember, Berlin was a little island inside of East Germany. You had to go through East Germany to get to Berlin, okay? One of the things that's very charming about Berlin is everywhere you look, there are gardens. Because, of course, they're draining this water. They still have a problem with that. And so, and you have parks, you have forests, you have lakes, and you have a lot. It's a very charming environment that you're always near a park or a place. The Germans are also very green. It's something when we're up top, look down and look at how many rooftops have gardens. They're using their all of their urban space as much as they can for to create a natural environment. Now, this is too many words, and I'm just going to tell you the very beginning. Germany. Look here to the map. Germany was 300 countries. It was little tiny countries, principalities, and it was not united, and it was called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the largest territory in the Holy Roman Empire belonged to Austria and the Habsburgs, but another larger territory that begins to emerge is Prussia, and Prussia's capital was Berlin. So this is actually where we're evolving. But Germany itself was very disunited. It was 300 small countries and territories. Now, Brandenburg, Berlin becomes the capital of Brandenburg, and this is around in the 14th century, and the person who does this is named Albert the Bear. And so this is the city crest of the city of Berlin. You'll see the bear everywhere. You'll see him on bridges, you'll see him on the crest. They even have statues of the bear all over. So this is the symbol of Berlin. Berlin is the bear. Okay. Now, the family that becomes attached to Berlin are the Hohenzollerns. And a lot of you who took European history, you remember the Hohenzollerns. And the Hohenzollerns are there from the beginning of the 15th century. And this is their, and they will rule Berlin through Brandenburg, then it becomes Prussia, then it becomes Germany, until the First World War. So the Hohenzollern family, the Kaiser of the First World War, was a Hohenzollern, and their seat was Berlin. So all the way back to the beginning of the early modern period, we attach the Hohenzollern family to Berlin. Now, the Berliners didn't necessarily at first want the Hohenzollerns to build their castle there. This is just a little story about how they prized their liberty, and they didn't necessarily want the Hohenzollerns to make them their capital, and it took 600 soldiers to convince them. They kind of took over the city to convince them to allow the Hohenzollerns to build their capital there. But this building, which is now reconstructed, and this is an interesting thing, as we go to Berlin, East Berlin, was under Soviet domination. And the city was bombed. And so there was a lot of discussion about what should be rebuilt. And after the Second World War, they did not rebuild this palace. This is called the Stadtschloss. Schloss is palace, the city palace. And it wasn't rebuilt by the East Berliners. As soon as they unified Germany, in the 1990s, they tore down the Palace of the Republic that had been built here, and they built this back. So this is connected to the Hohenzollerns. It was always there. So, and there's this kind of argument going on right now in East Berlin, and we'll hear something about should they ignore everything that happened during the Cold War? Because the Palace of the Republic that sat here for 50 years is also part of their history. So should they have torn it down to try and get rid of all those memories? And so there's this debate going back and forth. How much of East Berlin do they want to let go? And how much of it do they need to keep just for their own history? Yes?
What was their motivation behind building it other than that it had always been there?
They wanted that corner. They wanted it to look like it had in the 19th century. And the Palace of the Republic was there. It was justice. It was East German justice, and a lot of people, but it was a beautiful, it was a modern building, kind of, but it was a beautiful building, and the East Berliners wanted it to be an important building, so they used expensive materials, but a lot of people said that was always where the Kaiser, that's always where the Hohenzollern building was, and we want it back. So it's interesting, there's this debate.
Is there a museum in it now?
Yes, and it's also offices for the capital. not their city hall, but it's built so that the facade looks the same, the interior is different from when it was built before. Okay, but this building becomes the Staatsschloss, and it's the town castle, which was the home of the Hohenzollerns until 1918, when the Kaiser had to leave Germany and he went to the Netherlands after that. Okay. Now the 30 Years' War, again, those of you that took European history, you know, was very, very difficult for Prussia, Brandenburg and Prussia. Brandenburg, Prussia has no natural boundaries. There's no mountains, the rivers are small, and it's low land, and the armies of the 30 Years' War passed back and forth. And Brandenburg lost, I think, 1/3 of their population during the 30 Years' War, which was from 1618 to 1648. After the 30 Years' War, the Great Elector decided what? Well, how could he be sure that that would never happen again? That they would be damaged like that. Remember, what did he say they would always have in Prussia? An army, okay? And this is where, after this, remember, this is where Prussia becomes identified with its military. And the whole nation is built around the army. It's a small nation, but it's the 4th largest army in Europe, okay? So Brandenburg suffered tremendously during the 30 Years' War, with many battles fought on its territory and huge areas repeatedly scorched and burned. By the end of the war, Berlin was an insignificant town with 6,000 people in it. Everybody else had fled or died. Okay? Now, after 1648, this is the Great Elector. He's not so handsome, is he? I was looking for a younger picture of it, but this is a stamp that celebrates the contributions of the Great Elector to Prussia. We start to use the word Prussia now to mean Brandenburg, with Berlin as its capital, okay? Right? So the Great Elector. Now, I thought this was a funny story, so I'll tell it to you. This is the first Berlin Wall was actually built. Prussia made all of its young men be soldiers. If you were the oldest son, you served a little while, and then you could go home and take care of the land. If you were younger sons of the nobility, you served as Prussian officers. The young commoners became soldiers, and everybody served the army. Well, not every young man wanted to serve the army. So they were escaping. They were leaving Berlin, they were leaving Prussia, and they were trying to go other places. So this is all the way back in the 18th century. They built a wall around Berlin to keep the young men from escaping. So at any rate, Berlin has a series of walls. And one of the people that they caught trying to escape was the young Frederick the Great. Remember, he tried to escape and go away, and he was caught, and his father brought him back, and he executed the friend who had gone with him to teach, be quite a lesson, but to teach him that. And so it says, ironically, the more famous this was about Frederick the Great. He was caught trying to escape from Berlin, so he could go to Paris and lead the high life, and he was brought back. Okay. Now, Frederick the Great, you remember, was the descendant of the Great Elector, and he was a brilliant musician. He was a poet, but he was also very dedicated to the army. So Frederick the Great involved both the Enlightenment and the military side of the 18th century. And he does contribute a great deal to the reputation of Prussia as both a military camp and also a contributor to the Enlightenment. So Frederick the Great, his capital was Berlin. Now, Napoleon conquered Berlin. And this is Napoleon here, there's the Brandenburg Gate. Prussia was initially defeated and suffered occupation. Okay? Limits were set on the size of the standing army, and this was humiliating to Prussia. So that, remember, he proclaimed the Berlin Decrees, which started the continental system from Berlin after he had conquered it. But at the end of the Napoleonic era, it was the Prussians who brought the Germans together, and Napoleon was actually defeated, not at Waterloo. The first big defeat suffered by Napoleon was in Germany at Leipzig. And the Germans, for the first time, who had always been able, Napoleon could pull a few in his direction, somebody would pull a few in this direction, they fought together, and they defeated Napoleon. And this is called the Battle of the Nations, the German nations that came together to defeat Napoleon. They chased him back to Paris, and after that, arrested him, and after that, he went to Elba. So this was the very first defeat of Napoleon, was actually done by the Germans, oddly enough, for the first time, working together. Okay. So this is the Prussian era. Now, the Congress of Vienna, the Prussians were the victors, and so in the 19th century, Prussia is beginning to rise. It's an important German state. The most important German state is Austria. But Austria is beginning to fall behind. Prussia is beginning to rise. When it comes to German unification, Austria will not be there. It will not be a part of this. It will be Prussia. So the 19th century is the story of the rise of Prussia. And as Prussia's prestige rises, so does Berlin's. Okay? All right, so the Prussian era, we get things like this. The Brandenburg Gate, the kings built this at the end of the 18th century. And there's one of many gates that surround the little capital city of Berlin. Now, in 1871, the Germans, under the direction of Prussia, the Germans finally united into the German Empire. It was called the Second Reich. Okay, what was the first Reich or empire of the Germans? Anybody remember all the way back in 800? Who on Christmas Day became the first Holy Roman Emperor?
That was,
Not Constantine, starts with a C. Charles the Great, what's his name? Charlemagne, okay? And that's the first Reich. This is the Second Reich, and who will be the Third Reich? Hitler. And we don't talk about Reichs anymore in Germany today, okay? No more Reichs. But this was the Second Reich, okay? It's 1871. It's the Second
Amari
German
Mobley,
Empire.
please come
And
by the main office. Amari Mobley.
all of the Germans, except for Austria, which kept its own multinational empire together, Austria withdrew, and all of the Germans united under Prussia, capital at Berlin, and the Prussian king now becomes the Kaiser, the Caesar, okay? So the German Empire, and Berlin expanded rapidly, and this, we talk about Unter den Linden, the Great Boulevard, this is when Berlin becomes the great capital, okay? And the German Empire, Berlin expanded rapidly, and became the world's largest tenement city, which meant in terms of apartments and people moving in. Growth continued until it was interrupted by the First World War. At the end of the war, the emperor was forced to abdicate, and a republic was named. So we have the Reich lasts until 1918, and then we have the German Republic after that. Now, this is given the name the Weimar Republic, because if you remember, that's where the Constitution was written. They wanted to get away from Berlin, which was associated with the military. So they went to this beautiful town of Weimar, and which was famous for artists. Beethoven had gone there, Goethe had gone there, and they wrote the Republic for the Constitution for the Republic. Berlin becomes kind of famous for its decadent clubs, jazz clubs. It really got into the roaring 20s. I like these little ladies. There's the Potsdamer, the Brandenburg Gate back there, and they're cutting up. Okay, but the 1920s was a time of cabarets. It was a time of, as in a lot of places, in Paris and other places, a sort of lost generation. Berlin was one of the most famous centers of that. Okay, now 1933, the Nazis come in, and they're embarrassed by the Weimar Republic and the lack of seriousness, and so they attempt to squash it. It's hard to squash. Okay, in Berlin, this kind of nightclub jazz sort of stuff continues a little longer than 1933. The 1933 to 1945 is the Nazi period. And of course, Hitler launched his plans for German expansion from Berlin until it culminated in the attack of Poland, which started World War II in 1939. Berlin would be the center for a while until the bombing started. And then Berlin is going, 75% of the city, the center, will be destroyed by the bombings of Berlin. Okay? And this is the Reichstag building here, and the craters. And I love this, it was called the Eyeless City, because there was not a single pane of glass from all the reverberations and the shrapnel left in the city center of Berlin. It was bombed pretty much back to the Stone Age. Okay? There seemed to be no window pane intact by the time the Russians took Berlin in April of 1945. And so recovery from the Second World War is very different depending on which side of Berlin you were on. Berlin was partitioned as Germany was partitioned. There was an eastern zone that belonged to the Russians. There was a French sector in the north and the west. The American sector here, the British sector lies between the French, here's the British sector, and the American sector here. So Berlin was partitioned among the victorious groups. Okay. Now remember, Berlin itself is in the middle of East Germany. It is a little island, and surrounding it on all sides is East Germany. Okay? I put this up here because the Berlin Wall was not built until 1961, but the partition of the city, this says, Achtung, you are leaving West Berlin, okay? As soon as you cross into this Bernese-Platz, you are leaving West Berlin, and you enter on the other side, East Berlin. Now, in 1948, Stalin, who had hoped to take all of Germany, but he's furious because the West has hurried up and created the separate nation of West Germany. He's decided he's lost the western part of Germany, but by God, he's not going to lose Berlin. And so he closes the roads that bring the supplies in and keep the people of Berlin alive in the western part. And so nobody quite knows what to do, and they begin to fly in supplies down the roads. They can't veer left or right. They have to follow the roads. The airspace above is not closed, and so they begin what's known as the Berlin Airlift, which lasted over a year, did it not?
Pardon?
The Berlin Airlift lasted over a year, did it not?
18 months, I think.
18 months, and that plane every 10 minutes?
No, it's less, it's like every 3 minutes.
Every 3 minutes they were
And-
landing.
And there were 2 air paths that they were allowed to travel.
Right, the two airports, okay? All right, so, at any rate, the Berlin Airlift was a dramatic example of the hostilities of the Cold War, okay? Now, in 1961, up until 1961, the people of East Berlin, there was actually a streetcar that ran between East Berlin and West Berlin. One of the things we have to remember is that West Germany becomes the economic miracle of Europe in the 1950s and the 1960s. Their economy takes off through the roof. Their population, though, because of the war, is low. East Germany, which has its economy tied to Russia, which is the Soviet Union, which is recovering from invasion and also has a lot of a different approach to the economy, is struggling. But one thing that remains very, very strong in East Germany is their education system. They are producing chemists, they are producing engineers, they are producing all kinds of well-trained, their education system is stellar. And yet these people are having trouble and they're being assigned to low-level jobs. And right across, a streetcar ride away, is prosperity, huge prosperity in West Berlin, coming into West Berlin and getting into West Germany. So it's estimated that towards the beginning of 1961, 20,000 East Germans a month were defecting from East Germany into West Germany. And so in 1961, to stop this brain drain, the government of East Berlin decides that they are going to put up a barrier. And this becomes known as the Berlin Wall. So in 1961, we have the creation of the Berlin Wall. And so this was to seal off this loss of educated population that was further damaging the economy of East Germany. Okay? Countless East German citizens were seeking to find a better life in the West. Okay? Now, in 1963, we'll see a place.
Rachel Bethune, please come by the main office. Rachel Bethune, please come by the office.
In 1963, President Kennedy came and he gave a speech in support of the people of Berlin. He said there are some who say that communism is the way to the future. Let them come to Berlin. Let them see how people have to be walled away. And so he makes the speech in which he says, in essence, we are all Berliners. He says, Ich bin ein Berliner. However, and the Germans say this, but it's not with great disrespect. They had a great deal of admiration. We're very grateful for President Kennedy to say this, but a Berliner in German is a jelly donut. He meant to say we are all from Berlin, but he says I am a jelly donut. And they all ignored this because it was a very, you should see, I kept looking for the crowd, but all I could get, the crowd was so huge you couldn't even see all the different people. So I didn't put the crowd scene. Everyone was roaring. They knew exactly what he meant. But they might, while we're over there, they might make a reference to the jelly donut. But that's, even I'm Berliner, I am the jelly donut. But they knew what he meant, and they were grateful that he was there. Okay? The Germans told us that when we were over there. Okay? Now, for the next quarter century, Berlin would be an uneasy peace with its neighbor. the West poured massive subsidies into West Berlin to make it a capitalist paradise so that the people of East Berlin and the people of East Germany would see the prosperity of the West. But this is, of course, the Berlin Wall. In some places, the Berlin Wall was tall enough you could see over it. A lot of places had platforms. You could walk up and look over into East Berlin. But of course, anyone coming from this side went through a death zone. And I'm sure that they're going to take us to, there's a museum for the wall. There is a Checkpoint Charlie museum where you used to, if you wanted to go into East Berlin, Miss McCarran actually did this during the Cold War. She went through to East Berlin. And
Yet I was denied Checkpoint Charlie.
yeah, you were denied
Yeah, that's where they stopped me at customs.
coming back.
Yeah.
And you want to
Because you couldn't go, when it was East Berlin, you had to maintain register. You had to pay, convert some of your money. If you didn't spend it, they converted it back at a different rate, but you had to go in and out of the same exit or customs point. And I was trying to see most of the city and go out a different one, and they detained me until they could find somebody that could. But meanwhile, they're taking apart a woman's purse and x-raying
the
her
one in front of
cigarettes.
you, right?
Yes.
And
So-
what did you have in your purse that was contraband, Miss McCarran?
I had rocks that I stole from my mother.
For her garden. Everywhere she went, she brought rocks back for her mother. And of course, the woman in front of her, they're tearing apart her purse.
So I was afraid they were gonna tear mine apart.
Get your rocks, send you to jail. Did you finally get out through Checkpoint Charlie? or
No,
did you have to
and
go
I
back
never
to your-
did because my train was leaving. So you really, for an American to cross over into East Berlin, you had to have your passport, you had to have all of the things that were necessary. And it's one of the unique things here because we're not going to all these Euro places. We really will get our passports checked.
Not so much anymore.
Oh, no?
Not with the European Union. We can ask, and I like to ask, and they'll put it on.
I thought because they weren't using the euro, they would probably be stamping them.
I have seen not so much. Now, when you go to Switzerland, but it's the Swiss, it's not the Europeans around them that are so persnickety, but the Swiss are not part of the European Union, and they will look at everything real carefully.
But that's how they controlled everything, and they maintained the numbers of your passport. And you had to enter and exit from the same one, but they didn't tell you. And so, when I went through on a bus, 2 people were pulled out of the bus because they had magazines. Magazines were contraband. Newspapers and magazines, you could not take them into the city, into East Berlin.
The tightest borders when I was in Eastern Europe was between East Germany, and because the East Germans could actually make a better living in Czechoslovakia and other places, they tried to even move within Eastern Europe, and they used to take these big mirrors, like dental mirrors that you look at, they were giant, and they would go under the bus to look in the wheel wells to see if people were hiding and trying to ride out of East Germany in the wheel wells of the buses. So it was a very tight security between, yes.
Is that really how tall it was?
I'm not sure if they're saying, I went after. Miss McCarran was there when the wall was up. So, and a lot of the wall is down. I'm gonna show you how they marked the wall.
I think this is a very early picture of the wall because
Right.
most of the wall really was above your head. The
Right.
only way to, a couple of places they had platforms. So they're adding this,
It's got the rebar exposed.
and
maybe
they
they're
don't have enough buildings cleared.
Right, okay, yes, Mary?
Okay, are there still like pieces of the wall
Yes.
on the ground?
Yes, yes.
So if one were to like pick one up, could one take one home?
I don't think so. I think I got this piece. A student brought me this, but this was in the heady early days where there was stuff lying on the ground. There's none of this, okay? And you don't. And what's left up there are monuments. They're monuments to that period of time. So,
Bring a chisel.
okay, yeah, you touch that wall, you see what happens. Those people still live there, okay? They're not communists anymore. You touch that wall, see? Because that's all they have left. They had just a couple of big pieces. We'll see it. They'll show it to us. And I'm surprised at how thin it is. Look how thin it is. You really could almost knock it down with a heavy car. But of course, the guard towers is what kept you with the guns from touching. But so Ms. McCarran thinks this is still being built with the rebar here.
Originally, the wall, it was prescribed in treaty, but it literally went beside an apartment building, and people leapt out of the
We
apartment
saw on the
building
video, remember the
There-
woman who was
it
there
went
pulling her?
through some apartment buildings. So different places where it were, and they gradually cleared, I think it was a quarter of a mile, and that's where they put first the dogs, and,
Right, that's called the death zone.
but then they were automatic machine guns.
Right.
That
It
were
was the
motion
guards,
sensors.
that's what we were told when we were there. It was, because like I kept saying, this is so thin, you know, to be so famous. It's not like the Great Wall of China or something. And they said it was the guards that kept people away.
But like the first Berlin Wall, the statement to the East Berliners was, this is to keep the Westerners out, but the tanks that were placed there were facing east. And so it was to prevent the Easterners from getting out. And if you spent the night with a friend in east, you didn't get back to west.
And when they built this, they gave no warning. They cut the telephone lines. It was in August of 1961. People woke up and they were gonna, you know, make plans or go into the west. The west had, of course, the best shopping, and no one got out. Everybody stayed where they were.
I'm sure
After
there were
that.
families.
Families were ripped apart, you know, you didn't see your, you know, people, there are pictures of people crying on either side, you know, because they can't. But anyway, we're gonna see, let me go ahead, because I am taking up, I told Mr. Karen, this will not take that long, okay? All right, now, in 1989, you have the reunification, here they are, all those East Berliners standing on the wall, this is the gate behind the
So
the Brandenburg
which
Gate.
side are you looking at?
What side are we standing
The
on?
camera is on the east side or the west side? And how can you tell?
Because the gates.
The gate is harder. There's something else that'll tell you if you're on the camera is on the east or the west side. Huh?
Right,
The graffiti, what side could be graffiti? So
And
where's
west.
the camera?
right, on the west side. And plus you are looking over at the Brandenburg Gate was on the east side. But, so we're looking and they're coming over and they're standing up, okay? So at any rate, this is in November 9th, 1989. We had the breaching of the Berlin Wall and for all the different reasons that we won't go into now. But reunification, now this is what you'll see. When we go, you will see pieces of the wall are still there and the graffiti side, and some of them are graffiti on both sides because they did that after. Graffiti, and Ms. Hobbs can tell us differently, is not my favorite. But the Germans were not allowed to graffiti. So they graffiti everything. So this is something that's kind of takes you back when you go over there. But all through the city, wherever the wall was, you'll find these bricks. And this says Berliner Mauer, the Berlin Wall, and it has the date on it. So we can actually follow, and there you'll be kind of in a place where it's all beautiful and restored. Because one of the things we have to remember, the West German government put a lot of money into East Berlin when the wall came down to bring it back up. And it is beautiful. There's a lot of very beautiful stuff. There's a lot of Stalinist style stuff, but there's some very beautiful things on the eastern side. Because that's where the Kaiser lived. That's where the big museums are. That's where everything was on the eastern side. So the Russians got all the jewels, and they maintained them. And now they've all been the domes have been regilded. Everything kind of shines in East Berlin. But wherever the wall was, we'll see these plaques and these bricks. Okay. All right. And again, reunification. In 1990, there was a huge argument because Bonn in West Berlin, West Germany, was the capital since the Second World War, and there was a huge argument. They wanted to bring them back. And so this building, which is the Reichstag building, the one that was burned when Hitler blamed it on the communists, this was also built at the time of Bismarck. This building had been kind of abandoned. It was damaged during the war. In the 1970s, they had stabilized it, but there was no dome on it, and it was just kind of sat there because they didn't know what to do with it. So at any rate, they decided that they would move the capital to Berlin, and they put this beautiful glass dome on the top. Yes?
Are we gonna get to go up and walk?
I did, so I would imagine that's one of the things that they're gonna do with us. I don't know, I do know the EF tour that I went on, they did a lot of really nice things, and these are all close to each other, the Brandenburg Gate, the Parliament, the Reichstag.
Most likely.
All right, this is what I'm just gonna show you really quickly. This right here, this is kind of their Champs-Élysées, okay? It was called, in the 19th century, Unter den Linden, under the lime trees, under the linden trees, and it was trees all along here. Now, there was an uprising in 1953 when Stalin died on the 17th of June, and so A lot of people were killed as they thought that maybe they could encourage the Russians to go home. That was a mistake. So this part on the west is called the 17th of June. This is where the Brandenburg Gate is. This is where the Reichstag building is. And I have a feeling we're going to spend a lot of time in this area. So it's still called Unter den Linden on the eastern side. And so that's just to kind of remind that this was at one time all of this. This is their central park. It's called Tiergarten, with Tier as animals. It's where their zoo is. This was an old royal hunting park that's now been turned into a big green area. But anyway, we can do this a little bit later. I'm taking too much time, but I just kind of wanted to let you know. And this map is not a real good one for showing a lot of things, but I do want to encourage you to get a guidebook. Get some maps yourself and kind of look at things. One of the things we're going to love about Berlin is it's flat. Because it was called the swamp, it's flat. This is the Spree, the river, and you can see it goes all around. Down here is the Museum Island, right here. This is where all the museums are. But we always are crossing and recrossing the Spree. And so it's a kind of flat area. In Prague, we're going to be climbing hills, but this is a nice flat area for us to start on. Yes?
Is the Spree River the kind of thing you like go swimming in?
Well, you know what they do, and it's really cute, and I first saw it here, but then I saw it in Paris. In the summer, they make beaches, and they bring in sand, and they put little umbrellas, and here's a little urban river. I don't know if I ever saw anyone actually swimming, but you could get sun there. So I don't know if they, and I'm sure they must have swimming areas.
I'm going to.
We'll have to see how polluted it is, okay?
Yeah,
Where we
yeah.
start.
Thinking of like Ganges
Amari
River.
Mobley,
All right.
please come to the front of
So,
the school. Amari
anyway.
Mobley, please come to the
Okay,
front of the
and
school.
again, this is the Brandenburg Gate we will look at, all right? And very quickly, the Reichstag with the glass dome.
One of the neat things about the glass dome is right inside of it when you go to the next picture is you can also look in and see their government and see how it's functioning.
Yes,
So you
it's
can look out,
That's the image.
but you can also look in. And
And
so it's showing
transparency.
transparency, which the Berliners are much more a fan of.
Right, and so transparency of government, that's why the architect, who was an Englishman, who was chosen to do this, chose glass as the medium for the dome, okay? And this, we will see, this is for the Franco-Prussian War, and it used to stand right in front of the Reichstag, but the Nazis actually made the boulevard with this at one end and the Brandenburg Gate at another end, okay? And then Unter den Linden, and then the Museum Island, which is also where the Kaiser's Palace and the Kaiser's Church.
Go back one.
Okay,
The radio tower in the back
yes.
is a Soviet building, and it's a communications tower. Soviets were atheists. That tower in daylight always has a sunbeam cross on it. They sandblasted it, they changed finishes. It's one of these legends in the city that no matter what the Soviets did, or the East Germans under the Soviets guys, they could not remove the cross from that Soviet architecture.
And that is in what's called the Alexanderplatz, which was the center of old East Berlin. And the West Berliners used to say they couldn't wait till Berlin was united because that's the first thing they were going to take down. It was hideous to them. Well, now they love it because they're fond of it because it's been there for so long. But anyway, you'll see that all over the city. Okay, this is the radio tower here. Okay, you see
You'll get the
cross
German
on it?
name in a second.
Okay, all right, and that's the Museum Island, and then again, on the western side, we'll see the Kudamm, which is their very expensive shopping street, and the largest department store in Europe is also on Kudamm, in the
What
Kudamm.
store?
It's called Kadawi, and I love the imported foods, because remember there's so many Americans who are here, you go into the imported food section, there's Aunt Jemima pancakes, and there's skim peanut butter, and there's just this whole American section, we're like, oh, okay, I guess this is important to them, okay? All right, and then this is a Friedrichstrasse, which that was the old shop, and this is that beautiful square that we'll see. And so, and again, from the 18th century, the time of Frederick the Great, this is the Alexanderplatz here. And again, the old Jewish quarter is very interesting. This is the happening part of Berlin. Rents are cheaper, artists have their studios, clubs are there. This is where a lot is happening in Berlin. Okay, so maybe we'll walk around there one evening with us guarding you like this, walking around. Okay, Potsdamer Platz, this is the Sony building. And again, the inside is all inside that, and when you say, and I'm done, okay? So, all right,
Ms. Hobbs, you wanna-
yes, yeah,
yeah, it's
I have a teeny tiny thing. I just wanted to show you some of the, like,
oh, did you get to see that?
yeah, that's what I wanted you to know. This Oliver already talked about Museum Island, but this is, I guess it's 3. And so I was worried about us not having, I mean, obviously we're not gonna have time to see everything we wanna see, but I wanted to show you some of the more well-known things that are close together on Museum Island that you've already maybe learned about. So, like, Nefertiti is in Berlin. This is Queen Tai, who was one of your sketches you guys might have remember her. This isn't something we've talked about in class, but it's a really good Byzantine thing, and so I put that in there. You guys remember the Zeus, the temple of Zeus? Yes, it's good, people find stuff. And then the Ishtar Gate are all some of the bigger things that we see. I didn't do all the museums in Berlin because that's just not reasonable.
It's huge.
There's so many.
Right, but I wanted to do the things that are close together that we might be able to reasonably pick from that you may have seen. They also have, because there's a ton of Assyrian stuff everywhere, because there's so much of it. There's a lot of really cool, really good Assyrian stuff. And then it's not really easy to see, but like there's a nice couple Vermeers on Museum Island. These are people that we haven't talked about yet that are really important. Renoir, Cezanne, people that we will talk about. I know Miss Oliver talked about Caspar Friedrich. I don't talk about him, but you guys know him from the.
Abbey Graveyard in the Snow, the romantic that we use, the German romantic.
What was the one with the water? I should really know more
The
about
one with
him.
the cloud, you mean, the wander
Yeah, I feel
above
like
the mist,
underwater.
the
Yeah,
wander above the mist?
Wandering Boat. So that's him right here. This little one.
He's a German romantic, very important.
And this is it's very hard to see, but this is a Greek, mosaic, based on a Greek painting. So these are just some of the highlights. We're gonna have to get together and decide what we wanna see, but these are the big ones that I got excited about. That's it.
We are going to take questions in just a minute, so you can ask our experts about all of this. But before we do, because I know that can go on for a long time, because we'd love to hear them all talk to us, I wanted to remind you of a few things and give you a few assignments to do. I'll be sending all these out in email this afternoon, so you'll still be getting them, but just since you're here. We have our parent meeting coming up at the beginning of March, and I can't think of the date right now.
20-something, it's,
The
I
12th?
think we kept them on this,
The 26th is going to be when we look at Prague.
okay.
It's either the 12th or the 12th. I need all of you to encourage your parents to be here. We're going to be talking about the trip, talking about the safety things, going over questions, going over what you should have, what you should pack, those type of things. So really encourage your parents to be here. It's at 6 o'clock that evening. We are going to start the rooming process. Now, I need you to realize that we will be out in the city most of the time. This is going to be a very active vacation. It's not much vacation. You're going to be seeing a lot. So the time in your room is going to be to shower and smell nice and to sleep. So who you room with, it really won't matter that much. But what we need is a list. We need 3 to a room. So I need you to be able to start thinking about who you would like to be rooming with. We need 3, and then we need a list of 2. Does that make sense? Can you hear me now?
Wait, I'm confused now.
We could either have double rooms or triples, more likely. we'll
Most
have
likely as
triples.
students, you'll have triples.
Okay.
And so we want that option, but then we also want the option for double, so we can put you together.
So we could just put like 3 names and then.
You'll put your name and then 2 others.
Okay.
And as much as we can, we'll try to accommodate, but we can't promise, that's
Right.
all.
We won't know exactly until we get over there, and so that's gonna be something we have to play with as we go with that. I'm going to be sending out a link to a Google document, so you can put in your emails and your parents' emails, because that's something we haven't been able to do through the system. I want you to go onto the Google Docs and log in and fill out that information. And that's all I have to tell you right now.
Passports.
Your passports, you should all have them by now. I'm going to need 3 copies of them.
Like right now and today?
Not
Like soon?
Soon.
Of every page or just the front page?
Just the front page. I'm as much as I would love
Okay.
every page, I just want the page with your picture on it.
Okay,
I want 3 copies of it
in color.
in color. Because if we do lose them, I need to be able to have access to something very similar so we can get you a new one so we can continue to travel. So
Why would you do that?
why would I want to continue
Would
to
you just
travel?
hang out and want to like,
At the embassy, that would be really cool. Just
it would be
chilling out-
cool.
Just
In
chilling
an
out the
American
embassy
embassy?
all day long.
It's US government.
Thanks, Marion. Okay, 3 copies. Good. Questions? Any questions about Berlin, about Germany, about the art, about what we're gonna be seeing, about history? No?
We have enough free time. That's not bad news.
I don't think so.
We are moving. That's
That's
the
what it
thing,
was like.
four or five cities. A lot of our free time would be on the bus or the train or whatever gets us from one place to another.
Well, I was in, Rome, we would go and see a major site, our tour director would introduce what was around, and then they would give us maybe an hour or 2 and we could explore that area, maybe. We did move extremely fast though. You got back to the hotel and you were exhausted. We were nodding off often at dinner. You're going to be tired, you're gonna be seeing so much though. They packed so much into this trip. I literally saw the entire city of Rome and everything you could wanna see in 2.5 days. It was a lot, and each of these cities have so much to see that we just saw all that. We're gonna get to see so much, and get to hear so much history, but that's gonna be one thing. So we're gonna be tired, and we're also gonna have to really work on being on time, because they reserve slots for us, and if one person's late, we miss that. So being timely, it becomes a really big deal. So, okay.
If we're not doing the Potsdam, what we need to do is
I'm not sure where they have that lined up in the trip. We don't have a large troop going to Potsdam.
Do we have a group going?
We have, I think, 5 people signed up for that.
Okay.
I'll go.
I know, Karen wanted to go too, and I'm thinking, we'll have to talk. How soon do we have to know by that?
Fairly quickly for that. I have to go back and look at my calendar.
Do you all want to know about Potsdam really quickly?
Yes.
It's about half an hour, I think, from Berlin. It was the court city, the summer sort of palaces for the Hohenzollerns and the nobles and everything. So it's Frederick the Great, I think it was, loved the Dutch. He thought they were very industrious, so the town is kind of built in a Dutch style. And then you have these palaces. But Potsdam is very famous for the end of the Second World War, is where Truman and Stalin and Churchill came at the beginning, but he was unelected, and then Clement Attlee showed up, for Britain. But they began the negotiations to end the war at one of the. It's not really a palace. It's a kind of a Tudor-style big house that belonged to the Kaiser before the First World War. But all of that happened in Potsdam. It is very charming. It's just hard when there's so much to see in Berlin. And the other thing I want to tell you too, Mary, lunch is not provided. So when they're going to give us free time is that time around lunch. And so we'll go find our own lunch, and that's the time to go back and see something, that kind of stuff. But this is going to be a fast trip because we are going to so many cities.
Plus, there's 40 people.
Yeah.
So we will be dividing up often to take care of things.
Would that be a
Rebecca?
case where we might have some free time if they're going to Potsdam?
Well, we'll probably have a little bit. I won't know the tour director and exactly what we're gonna be doing. He or she will give us a lot of options. They're going to have several other tour things that we can add on to it. I was able to add a night tour room onto my trip.
They'll have options. They
And
have to
so
pay
we'll be-
for them. But meals, there's sometimes, we went in Spain to get tapas, was not planned. But everybody wanted to put $16 in it, but we could go out and get tapas. But we made the decision on site there, so there'll be opportunities like that. What is it, is it shopping? Do you want to wander? Do you have?
I just wanted, not necessarily shopping, I just wanted to see what, like, have
Set
time
an
to-
agenda for
yeah.
yourself and realize
Okay.
it. Okay. All right, but we
It'll
don't
be
know.
hard to accomplish that doing
I have a
Potsdam.
question for you.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
You've been
I
to your
don't think so.
Okay, so is there like Okay, so we have Goodwills in the United
Right.
States. Is there like one company that does that in Europe?
I don't know, that's something we could research.
Because
Because
it's
it's vintage clothing.
Yeah.
Type in vintage clothing in Berlin, let's see what comes up.
Because I really, really want to do that.
That's what you like, but I do know that flea markets, the flea market in Rome is huge.
Yeah,
and
the one
it's
in England.
fascinating, you know?
It's supposed to be really
So
good.
we could research that. Again, I don't know, we can't make any promises, but we can certainly take your desires into consideration.
Because we're a large enough group, we're gonna be able to twist and turn this tour more to what we'd like. So if there's something that the majority of the group wants to see, we'll be able to somewhat tweak our trip and
Sometimes, sometimes,
some things are
In different
set
parts of
and
the
certain, and
city.
we have to do it, and we have to be there on time.
Things that are paid for.
Things that are paid for.
and sometimes with us, you know, like, we really wanted to go back in Paris to the opera, to Haussmann's Paris, you know, that 19th century, and we never got back there because we saw other interesting things, but the distance was so huge. So, you know, but where we can make it our trip, we will try to do so, but you have to tell us.
Yeah.
I wanna have 2 hours to set my own agenda
Okay.
and do feel independent, okay? And flea markets are a lot of fun.
Yes.
But on
And there's so
agenda,
much history.
on agendas, like, the group of four, is that,
Yeah, but-
While we are there, we're always gonna be traveling. If you go off away from a chaperone, there's not a chaperone to be with all of you. You're gonna be in groups of 4. You always have to be. Never by yourself. That way, if something happens to you, someone can stay with you, 2 people can come back and get us.
It's a system,
You're-
ES got the system for everything.
That's how